Welcome to Chetan Bharat Learning and welcome back to our weekly current affairs series in which we'll cover all the important developments with respect to the field of Indian economy for your UPSC preparation. Now, the Indian economy related current affairs that we are going to cover in this video would be from 21st of September to 27th of September. Alright, so without further ado, let's take a look at the issues that we are going to cover, economy related issues that we are going to cover in this particular video. Issues to be covered. Like promised in the previous lecture related to economy, I told you that we are going to discuss farm bills, pros and cons. So the first topic of our today's discussion would be farm bills, the recently tabled farm bills, advantages, benefits and cons, pros and cons. We'll discuss these three bills in a holistic manner. Alright, then next we'll talk about Human Capital Index. Well, recently World Bank released Human Capital Index in which different countries are ranked according to their investments in human capital. In this particular index released by World Bank, India secured a rank of 116th rank. So we'll talk about why India secured this rank and we'll also talk about what this Human Capital Index is all about. Alright, then we'll jump to funds collected through cess. Recently in a report by CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General, they said that there were certain discrepancies with the central government's accounts with respect to the cess collected by central government. So what were those discrepancies? We'll talk about that and we'll talk about CAG's report also. Alright, and in the end, in brief, we'll talk about certain infrastructure related issues. Alright, so without further ado, let's begin with the first topic of discussion, farm bills. Alright, now for this video, I have shortlisted certain articles. Some were in Hindu, some were in Indian Express. But you can, if you Google farm bills, you'll find n number of articles in every newspaper possible. Even in the Hindu or Indian Express, there are more articles written about farm bills. I have just selected or shortlisted these few. All right. So whenever you'll Google, if you Google farm bills, you'll find many articles related to farm bills. All right. Now, in this video, we'll just talk about farm bills from an economic standpoint. Okay. We'll talk about the economic aspect of farm bills. All right. The polity related aspect was discussed by Chetan sir in the previous polity related current affairs video. We'll just talk about the economic aspect. We won't touch polity. We won't touch political developments also. Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, or what are these demonstrations, farm bill protests are all about. We'll just discuss it from an economic standpoint. Point of view. All right. Now, before understanding what these farm bills are all about, you need to know how agricultural marketing in India functions or how it has functioned so far. All right. You see, before independence and just after independence, farmers used to sell their produce to different players. Generally, farmers used to sell their produce to wholesalers. Now, these wholesalers are also known as Aadhiyas. You must have heard this term, Aadhiyas. So farmers used to sell their produce to Aadhiyas in different mandis all over India. Now, there were no rules and no regulations with respect to wholesalers. There was no law which regulated these wholesalers. So these wholesalers used to practice their operations with impunity. They had dominance over agricultural marketing and they used to exploit farmers because they had no rules under which they had to operate. So therefore they made their own rules and their rules were for their own benefit. Those rules were actually to the detriment of farmers. Okay, so wholesalers, Aadhiyas, used to exploit farmers in general. Now, after independence, Government of India decided that it needs to protect the interests of the farmers and it needs to curtail or curb the extravagancies conducted or the extravagancies committed by these wholesalers. So what they did was, as you guys already know, some of you might know this, that agricultural marketing is a state subject. That means only state legislatures are allowed to make laws on it. Okay, as you guys must have learned about this, that there are three lists in Constitution of India, under the Constitution of India. One is Union List. The subject mentioned in these lists are those subjects on which only central government or parliament can legislate. Then there is State List. Subjects mentioned under this list, the subjects mentioned in this list are those subjects on which only state legislature can make laws. And the third is Concurrent List. Now, concurrent list is that list in which the subjects mentioned in this list are those subjects on which both center and states can make laws. Now, agricultural marketing actually belonged to state lists. That means only state legislatures were allowed to legislate on this subject, and only state legislatures could create rules and regulations to regulate these wholesalers, Artiyas. So what they did was, each and every state in India enacted APMC laws, APMC acts. Mind you, state governments. Under these APMC acts, in a state, one APMC would be established, and under this agricultural produce marketing committee would be different marketing yards, or we can call them mandis. So different mandis would be registered under APMC, this committee, and this committee would be regulated by this law, this act. All right. Now, under this APMC Committee Act, APMC was given the power to regulate these wholesalers. Now, these wholesalers had to function under certain set of rules and regulations. They couldn't exploit farmers now. They were forced, or in a sense, they were asked to create a proper system in which both farmers and wholesalers could benefit. Everything related to wholesalers, everything related to mandis was now regulated by state government through APMC, Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee. So the first reform conducted by Government of India just after independence was in the field of agricultural marketing was to create a system under which these wholesalers, these farmers, and the entire agricultural marketing would function. Clear? Farmers were not allowed to sell outside these mandis. Farmers were told that they cannot sell outside these mandis. If farmers were to sell outside those mandis, if farmers were selling their produce to someone else, that particular someone else had to sell further their that commodity in these agricultural marketing yards or mandis. So this is how through APMC, Government of India, or to be precise, state governments were regulating these wholesalers. But after the functioning of APMC and after the functioning of these committees and mandis for so long, it has been more than 70 years, I guess 60 years, that these committees or these mandis have been functioning. It was found that even these mandis were exploiting farmers. And farmers didn't have any freedom of choice. Farmers had to sell their produce in these mandis only. They couldn't sell anywhere else. So farmers' freedom of choice was curtailed through these reforms, through these acts. And what was thought was that there was many people, many economists, many agricultural economists felt that there was a need in our country that we need to reform this APMC structure. And they have been talking about APMC related reforms, agricultural marketing related reforms for quite some time now. I guess it's more than 2 decades now they have been talking about this subject. Now, they have been talking about it, but the central government couldn't do anything about it. Why? Because agricultural marketing was part of state list, and central government or parliament was powerless. In a sense, it couldn't legislate on agricultural marketing, and that is why these things were going on. Now what has happened is, through farm bills, union government has tried to bring in reforms in agricultural marketing, and these agri-marketing reforms or these 3 farm bills are actually an attempt by union government, parliament, to reform APMC. All right. Now, how they have reformed these APMC acts, these agricultural marketing norms, and what are farmers protesting about? Let's take a look at that. Okay. Now, farmers in Punjab and Haryana have been protesting against 3 farm reform bills. Okay. Now, what are these 3 farm reform bills? Number 1 is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Bill. Actually, most of the farmers' organizations are protesting against this particular bill. It is this bill they have the most issue with. Okay, other 2 bills are also, they don't agree with the other 2 bills also, but this particular bill is actually something that farmers don't agree with, and they have a lot of issue with it. Clear? Then we'll talk about Farmers Empowerment and Protection Agreement on Prices Assurance. This is the second farm bill, and the last bill is an amendment to the existing act, which was Essential Commodities Amendment Bill. All right. Now, as many as 31 farmers organizations are to fight collectively against these 3 bills. And the first on their agenda is the common program. I mean, they gave a call for Punjab Bandh. Mostly farmers from Punjab and Haryana are protesting against this bill. So you must have heard this in news also. Punjab Bandh call, Haryana Bandh call, and all these things. Okay. Now, what do farmers have? I mean, what are the provisions of these three acts that farmers have a problem with? Okay. Let's take a look at this Act number 1. Farmers Produce Bill. You see, what the government of India has done is through this first bill, Farmer Produce Bill, is they have reduced the autonomy. I shouldn't say autonomy, but the monopoly of APMC mandis. What government has said is that farmers now have the option to sell either to APMC regulated mandis or to any third entity, anyone, or to anyone they want to. All right. So farmers now have the choice to either sell their produce to APMC mandis or any third party. All right. Now, Government of India or this bill has called these third party or these alternative sources of marketing trade areas. All right. The other thing is that when a farmer sells its produce in APMC mandis, they have to, or the Aartiyas who are in these mandis, they have to pay a marketing fee. Okay, but buyers again, Aartiyas are buyers, wholesalers are buyers of farm produce. Buyers practicing in trade areas do not have to pay a marketing fee. So government has made the position of buyers in these areas, alternative areas, advantageous. Right? So that is why people who had vested interest in APMC mandis are protesting against this bill. This bill. Why? Because it positions, or it actually favors, incentivizes these trade areas where farmers can also sell their produce. Earlier, they could only sell their produce to APMC regulated mandis. Now, what are these trade areas? Trade area could be a factory, processing plant, okay, a produce collection center, a cold storage operator, a warehouse silo, or even a company, a food chain. For example, Reliance Fresh, Easy Day, Walmart. All of these players can now be included in the category of trade area and they don't have to pay marketing fee. All right. Yeah, transactions in such trade areas will not be charged APMC market fee or cess. All right. Now, what is the argument of government? What is government's argument? Why does government believe that this would eventually help farmers? Okay, the argument given by various ministers of the government or the government itself is that these three farm bills would actually favor farmers and they would actually reduce the role played by middlemen. So these three bills are against middlemen, but they are in favor of farmers. So what is government's argument? Let's take a look at that. The government says that this legislation will create an ecosystem where farmers will enjoy freedom of choice. Farmers will be able to sell anywhere they want. They can sell their produce to APMC mandis. They can sell their produce to anyone, any private marketing yard, any wholesaler, any exporter, any big corporate food chain. They can sell their produce to anyone. Okay? Anywhere in the country. Clear? Next, neither farmers nor traders, processors, retailers and exporters will henceforth be forced to sell or buy on the physical premises of APMC mandis. Earlier, if there was an exporter who wanted to buy certain agricultural commodities from farmers, he had to buy those agricultural commodities on the APMC floor, agricultural APMC mandis floor. All right. But now he can buy that produce directly from farmers anywhere. He need not be regulated under APMC mandis. Then this will reduce the role of middlemen because APMC actually promoted or actually incentivized the middlemen, the Aartiyas, the wholesalers who had license to operate under these APMC regulated mandis. All right. Now, these people, their role would be diminished because they would now face competition from other private players. Earlier, they had a privileged position. They had their links with the state government and they used to get license from APMC, the Agricultural Produce Marketing Committee. Their privileged position was protected because farmers were forced to sell their produce through them only. Now the government has sidestepped them, the government has bypassed them, and government is saying that farmers can sell their produce bypassing these APMC mandi wholesalers, Aartiyas. Okay. So this will reduce the role of middlemen and the cascading effect on prices caused by multiple levels. Now, what do you mean by this cascading effect? You see, the agricultural commodities that reach you, that reach us, the consumers, go through a series of middlemen. From farmer or farm gate, they reach their final consumer through a series of middlemen. Okay, here is the wholesaler, then retailer, food processor. There are many middlemen who actually, through whom these agricultural commodities go. All right, this particular thing is known as the supply chain of agricultural commodities. Now, the more the number of middlemen in this supply chain, the worse it is for the consumers or farmers, because these middlemen operate on commissions. Now, higher the number of middlemen, higher would be the commission, and higher the commission, more would be the price of the final commodity, or the price that these consumers pay for these agricultural commodities. So it is bad for consumers and it is bad for farmers as well, because if these middlemen want to protect their commission, they would have to pay lesser amount of price or lesser amount to farmers as well for their produce. So the higher the number of middlemen, more farmers or consumers would be exploited. Make sense? So what government has tried to do with this particular bill is to reduce the role of middlemen, to reduce the number of middlemen. Now what would happen is that Reliance Fresh or Easy Day or Walmart would directly go to the farmer. They would procure their food crops, and then they would directly sell that to the consumer. So the number of middlemen is reduced. Only one middleman, that is the corporate food chain, would exist, and hence the commission would reduce. I mean, the amount of commission would be reduced, and hence the cascading effect caused by these commission, multiple levies, taxes, marketing fee would be reduced. Clear? Make sense? So this is what the line, taken by government. Government is arguing these benefits. Now, what are farmers protesting against? Okay, let's take a look at that. Before understanding the arguments given by protesters or farmers, you need to understand that there is a thing called MSP. Now, what is MSP? Minimum support price. Now, farmers are assured just before the sowing season that if they grow this particular crop, for example, wheat or rice, they would be given an assured price. Now, what do you mean by assured price? That even if the market price of that particular commodity falls, government is ready to procure their produce at this early declared price only, at this price that is declared beforehand. Make sense? All right. So even the farmers are given assurance. MSP gives assurance or price predictability. It provides farmers with the facility of price predictability, because farmers are now not worried about the market price. If market price falls below a particular threshold, then farmers could sell directly to the government at this price. So this is a protective measure that government provides, MSP. Now, MSP procurement by government happens through APMC mandis. Okay. Now, farmer organizations are saying that if government is undermining APMC mandis, then indirectly government is also undermining the MSP regime, which has worked so well for farmers in the past. All right. So government is actually indirectly hampering this MSP regime, and MSP regime is the protection that farmers need in times of crisis. Okay. So in a way, farmers are saying, the protesters are saying that this particular bill is government's sinister way to undermine MSP regime. All right, that is why they are protesting, because they don't want MSP to go. Plus, what these farmer organizations are saying is that the government has not assured them about MSP. Government has not used the word MSP in this bill. So government is not saying it, but what they want is to do away with MSP regime, because they haven't assured us, us being the farmers, that they haven't assured us that MSP will be protected at all cost. Even if APMC mandis are undermined, MSP would still be protected. Okay, government has not given any assurance, though many ministers must have said this. Many ministers might have said that MSP won't be hampered, but that doesn't translate into any sentence written or any provision mentioned in these bills. All right. Agricultural marketing is a state subject under and yes, by the way, they are also protesting about the fact that agricultural marketing is a state subject. So central government is not empowered or is not constitutionally mandated to legislate on this subject. It is the power of state government. So government has, the union government has breached its sphere of influence. Okay. Agricultural marketing is a state subject under Schedule 7 of the Constitution. Therefore, Center has no business in enacting such a law. All right. MSP regime and government procurement agencies function through these APMC regulated marketing yards or mandis. This new law does not mention MSP, and thus farmers believe that this government's attempt to do away with MSP regime, which has worked so well for them in the past. All right. This law will increase distress sale. Now, what farmers actually believe, or what farmers are speculating, they're saying that initially this might look like it will help the farmers. But what these bills are doing is they are creating space for big corporate food chains. Once these corporate food chains establish themselves in the agricultural marketing sphere, they would monopolize the agricultural marketing sphere. And once they monopolize this space, then they would start to exploit farmers. So initially, this might look that farmers are having more opportunity. They are being provided with freedom of choice, right? But what they think is that this is nothing but the sinister design of the government to promote corporate farming or to allow corporate food chains, corporate food processors to dominate this space and exploit the farmers in return. Okay, so this law will increase distress sale. Now, what is distress sale? When farmers are forced to sell at a lower price. Once these big corporate houses establish themselves, then they will force the farmers. And what choice do farmers, small and marginal farmers, have in front of these big corporate houses? Right? These big corporate houses have the power, money, muscle to exploit farmers, and small and marginal farmers have nothing to protect themselves against. Okay? This law will increase distress sale by farmers, and freedom of choice would easily be converted into freedom to get exploited. All right. So this is what farmers are protesting. These are the provisions that farmers are protesting against. And that is why they say that this particular bill is detrimental to the interests of the farmers. All right. Now we'll jump to the next bill, which is also popularly known as the contract farming law. Now, what is contract farming? You see, what the government is doing is, and that is why farmers actually believe that government is doing away with the MSP regime. What MSP regime does is it provides price predictability to farmers, right? Farmers are assured of a fixed return. They have been told about the prices they will get for their produce beforehand. All right. So farmers get price predictability through MSP regime. Now, government believes that price predictability can be provided to farmers through other alternative means as well. And what are those alternative means? Nothing but contract farming. If farmers engage themselves in contract farming, if they engage themselves or be a party to several contracts with big food chains, then they don't need MSP for price predictability. Now, how would that happen? For that, you need to know a bit about contract farming. So basically, contract farming, in brief, is nothing. Let's suppose there is this big company called Frito-Lay, and it manufactures chips. Now, for them to manufacture chips, they need potatoes. So they will contact potato farmers. And they will tell them the quality of potatoes they need, the quantity of potato they need 6 months down the line. And both of these parties would negotiate the price at which this big company Lay's would buy potatoes of this quality and this quantity from farmers. All right. Now, all of this would be mentioned in an agreement. And this agreement is nothing but the contract that a farmer has with this big food chain company. Clear? Now, farmers are assured and guaranteed this price. So without even MSP, without government procuring their potatoes, they would be given this price, conditional upon the fact that they provide this quality and this much quantity of their produce. Now, farmers are assured of fixed returns. Farmers are assured of a particular price. So farmers would get price predictability without the MSP regime. They can directly deal with the private parties. All right. Now, this under APMC Act, contract farming was disincentivized. Contract farming was not promoted. But now, under this new law, second bill, contract farming would be promoted and farmers would have more choice to enter into contracts with these big food chain companies or corporates. Clear? Makes sense? Now, let's take a look at the bill. This bill says that farmers can now enter into written contracts or agreements with anyone, including a company, and sell them their produce for a set period of time as per the contract. Make sense? Farmers can negotiate the price for their produce, standards and quality and other legalities beforehand. So they'll be assured of the price, the produce and everything, other legalities as well. Thus, this bill wants to introduce contract farming in India. Now, what are the advantages of this bill, or what is the argument put forward by the government? How can the government say that this bill is advantageous for farmers? Government's argument: it will protect and empower farmers to anyone, all right, wholesaler, retail giant or an exporter, okay, because now farmers can negotiate a contract. Farmers are an equal party now, so they can enter into contract with these people. Farmers will have written contracts which will protect them if a buyer tries to cheat them. Now they have entered into a written contract. Now whatever is written in that contract, that particular buyer would have to fulfill those conditions. So now they cannot cheat the farmers at their own will, okay. They can also sell their future produce today, thereby allowing them benefits of price predictability. We have discussed this just a few minutes back, that how farmers would be assured of price predictability. All right. Now, what are the arguments put forward by protesters? What do protesters say? Arguments given by protesters. They say that what if there is a dispute between a big food chain company and farmer related to the interpretation of the contract. Now, in case there is a dispute, contractual dispute, that dispute enters the court system, the legal system. Now, they say that these big food chain companies have money power, they have muscle power, they can afford an army of lawyers, whereas these small and marginal farmers cannot afford even a normal lawyer, all right? So chances are that in case of a dispute, these big food chain companies would win. Generally, they would win. And hence, they have this option, because they know about their legal power, they have this option of exploiting the farmers. Because farmers don't stand a chance against these, as far as the courts are concerned, farmers don't stand a chance against these big corporate companies, okay? 82% of India's farmers are small and marginal. Now, what do you mean by small and marginal farmers? Farmers whose land is less than 2 hectares. These farmers don't stand a chance against big corporate houses, Reliance Fresh, Easy Day, or Walmart for that matter. All right. So that is why they say that dispute resolution is a major issue. Through courts, these small players, these small farmers won't get justice. That's what their argument is. Okay. Dispute resolution and enforcement of contracts in India is a huge issue. Plus, 82% of farmers in India are small and marginal. It would be wishful thinking to assume that these farmers would go against a big supermarket chain in court and win. All right. There is no mechanism of fixing the price. This would give a free hand to corporates against small farmers, which would lead to farmer exploitation. Again, freedom of choice would be converted into freedom to get exploited. This is not freedom of choice. As a matter of fact, farmers believe that in the end, eventually 2 or 3 years down the line, big corporate houses would get the power to exploit small and marginal farmers. Clear? Makes sense? So now you know both sides of the argument. Okay? Okay. Now let's go to the third bill, which is Essential Commodities Amendment Bill. Okay, you already know about essential commodities. If you're watching our GS economy lectures, you already know about essential commodities. Okay, so what is this bill all about? Let's take a look at that in brief. Okay, this law actually controls the distribution, supply and movement of commodities that were considered essential. Under this, stocking limits were imposed on commodities considered essential in order to control artificial increase in prices due to hoarding. As you guys all know, essential commodities, the prices of essential commodities were generally, like onion or potatoes, were generally increased by these wholesalers or artias artificially by hoarding, thereby decreasing the supply of these commodities in the market, artificially increasing the demand, and hence price rise. Okay, so under Essential Commodities Act, earlier these hoarders were prohibited to stock beyond a particular limit. Now what government has done through this amendment is that agricultural commodities would be put out or would be extracted out of this bill, would be extracted out of the purview of this bill. So now no more, agricultural commodities would no more form a part of Essential Commodities List. But it is conditional upon one circumstance, which is that it is conditional upon the fact that there is no emergency situation. In case there is a war or a famine or the prices of these agricultural commodities rise beyond 100%, then government can use the emergency clause and put stocking limits on these agricultural commodities. But unless that happens, government is not allowed to put stocking limits on these agricultural commodities. Agricultural commodities are now extracted out of this list. Okay. The new amendment removes food commodities such as cereals, onions, pulses, edible oils, etc. from the list of essential commodities unless there are emergency circumstances like war, famine, or extraordinary price rise. Okay. Yeah, the government now cannot impose stock limits unless there is a 100% increase in price of perishable goods or a 50% increase in the price of non-perishable goods. Perishable goods are those agricultural commodities that perish very easily. They get stale when they are kept outside. They need refrigeration. Okay, otherwise they get stale. Non-perishable can stay outside for longer periods of time unless their moisture levels or the heat levels are under control. Okay, anyway, critics believe that this amendment will lead to increase in hoarding. The reason why Essential Commodities Act was installed in the first place, hoarding, and an artificial rise in price of food commodities that are considered essential for consumption by common public. All right. Now, in your notes, I have given you these screenshots as well from Indian Express. These pictures, they actually tell you about farm bills in brief. Okay. What are these farm bills about? Three arguments put forward by the government. Then, why are farmers protesting, or why do farmers fear these new bills? And are the fears of farmers valid? Okay, so all these things, you can find these screenshots in your notes as well. Okay, and with that, we finish our topic, farm bills. From an economic standpoint, we finish this. Okay, you don't need to know anything more about farm bills apart from what we have discussed just now. Why? Because you see, there are a lot of arguments being put forward by people, but most of those arguments are political in nature. Many people are talking about Congress, BJP and all that stuff. You don't need all that stuff for UPSC preparation. What you need is these things, these arguments that we discussed just now. Okay, that's only required for your UPSC preparation. All else is not required. Okay. All right. So now we are done with farm bills. It's a pretty long topic. Now we'll jump on to the second issue, which is Human Capital Index. Now recently, World Bank has released Human Capital Index rankings in which India actually slipped one place. In 2018, India's rank was 115. Now, in this new list, India's rank is 116. Now, what is Human Capital Index? For that, you need to know certain things. Okay, so pay attention. You see, each and every production process in the country or all over the world, each and every production process, each and every economic activity, anyone who is producing goods or services require labor and capital. Without these two factors of production in itself is not possible. Okay, so any producer would require some amount of labor and some amount of capital. Now, what do I mean by capital? You see, capital goods are those goods which are used to aid the production process. For example, tools, machines, automatic machines, plant, machinery, building, constructed areas, right? All these things form a part of your factory's capital because they aid in the production process. While these capital goods aid in the production processes also require laborers. All right. Now, these two are the most important factors of production that any producer requires. Now, capital, to improve your production process, you would want high quality capital as well as high quality labor. Now, you know, labor is also known as human capital. Because laborers also aid in the production process, but they are human beings, right? So it is also known as human capital. Now, if you want to make your production process more efficient, then you require efficient and good quality capital and efficient and good quality labor. Okay, so to improve your labor productivity, you require good quality labor, right? To improve the efficiency of human capital, you require good quality labor. Now, what are the two determinants of high labor productivity? Labor productivity in your country can increase if government is investing in education and skill level of the labor force. Okay, if your laborers are more educated and if your laborers are more skilled, then your labor productivity would be high. Make sense? And the other thing is, if your laborers or the human capital, if your government is investing on health, then also it would have a positive impact on your labor productivity. Why? Healthy laborers would work more. Healthy laborers would take very few amount of sick leaves. Healthy laborers would have higher productivity. All right. So government of India, or any government for that matter, if it wants to improve their labor productivity, they need to invest in education and skill development and health infrastructure of a country. Now, what this human capital index does is it actually ranks countries on the basis of the investment done by their governments in children's education and children's health. Because these children would be the next generation labor force. In coming times, in the next generation, these children would become a part of your labor force. Now, if they are highly skilled, if they are highly educated, if they have a good health, then they would contribute more towards your country's economic growth, and their productivity would be high. So if a country is investing in health and education of children, now they would reap these dividends in the next generation. Okay, so this actually ranks countries on the basis of the investment made by these countries in next generation labor force. All right, so it ranks countries on the basis of investment made in health and education or skill. All right, now India has secured a rank of 116. That is quite poor. All right, let's take a look at the indicators on the basis of which, indicators or parameters on the basis of which they allot a score to these countries. Okay. Yeah, so all this information, this human capital index is also a part of World Bank's human capital project. Okay, all that relevant information would be provided in your notes itself. Okay, now let's take a look at indicators. The index is grounded on 3 pillars. Number 1, survival. Share of children surviving past the age of 5. Then schooling. Expected years of schooling by the age of 18. Harmonized test score. Now this aspect would actually judge the quantity of education available in a particular country. If a country has more number of schools, then more number of students would have a higher expected years of schooling. Right? So this particular aspect looks after the quantity of education. But harmonized test score actually tests the learning outcomes. It actually tests the quality of education being provided in these schools. Okay? Then last is health. Adult survival rates, healthy growth among children. All right? So this is all about, all these things would explain. Plus, I would just want to say this, that I have just explained the important aspects of human capital index. There is a lot of other information, but for that you need to read your notes. All right? Okay. Now let's move on to the third issue, which is funds collected through cess. Now, recently what has happened is that CAG, Comptroller and Auditor General, which was actually taking a look over union government's accounts, said that there were certain discrepancies, there were certain illegalities with respect to the funds collected through cess. Now, what are these illegalities? Let's take a look at that. The union government is empowered to raise revenue through a gamut of levies. Union government can raise its revenue through taxes, both direct and indirect. What are direct taxes? Example being corporate tax, income tax. What is the example of indirect tax? GST. Okay. Surcharge, fees and cess. Okay, center's share of taxes can be spent by government for any public purpose in any manner it deems appropriate for the nation's good. Now, the money collected through these taxes, the center's share of taxes, center can spend this money, any way it wants. It can spend it on any good or service it wants. It's completely center's prerogative to utilize this money. But what about cess? The money collected through cess, you must have heard about Swachh Bharat cess, GST compensation cess, Krishi Kalyan cess. Now, what happens with cess is that the money collected by cess should be spent on the scheme through which that money was being collected. For example, if you are collecting money through Swachh Bharat cess, then the money collected through that cess should be spent on Swachh Bharat Abhiyan itself. You cannot spend that money in any other good or in any other scheme. All right. A cess is an earmarked tax that is collected for a specific purpose and ought to be spent only for that. Every cess is collected after Parliament has authorized its creation through an enabling legislation that specifies the purpose for which the funds are being raised. Article 270 of the Constitution allows the cess to be excluded from the purview of divisible pool. You see, GST, income tax, all this money collected through taxes goes into central divisible pool. Okay, now the money collected in this divisible pool would be divided between center and states on the basis of the recommendations of Finance Commission. Now the center's share would go to Consolidated Fund of India. But what about cess and surcharge? Money collected through cess or surcharge would directly go into the Consolidated Fund of India. It won't go into central divisible pool. That means money collected through cess or surcharge won't be shared with state governments or states. That is completely the property or the money of central government. Okay? The Comptroller and Auditor General of India, in its latest audit report of government accounts, has observed that Union government withheld in the Consolidated Fund of India more than 1.1 lakh crore of the almost 2.7 lakh crore collected through various cesses. Now what happens is, money collected through cess goes into Consolidated Fund of India. Okay? After that, money collected through Swachh Bharat cess would go to Swachh Bharat Abhiyan Fund. Money collected through Krishi Kalyan cess would go to Krishi Kalyan Fund. Money collected through GST compensation cess would go to GST compensation fund. Government cannot keep money collected through a cess in Consolidated Fund of India. It needs to go to that reserve fund for which that particular cess was created. Now what CAG has found is that some amount of money, 1.1 lakh crore out of the almost 2.7 lakh crore collected through various cesses was withheld in Consolidated Fund of India. That means government did not transfer some amount of cess collected to their respective funds. It actually kept with itself. And government kept this amount with itself so that it can fulfill its other obligations. Now that is not legally permissible. If a government collects money through a particular cess, that entire amount should be spent to that particular scheme. Okay, so what government did according to CAG was a little bit illegal. CAG found this objectionable since cess collections are supposed to be transferred to specified reserve fund like GST compensation fund, okay, that Parliament has approved for each of these levies. All right, so this is what the controversy is all about. And yes, if you want to know more, then go through the notes that will be provided to you with this lecture. All right. Now we'll talk about the last topic of our discussion, infrastructure related issues. Now what I would want is that you guys should go through these articles. Now the first article mentioned in Indian Express about District Mineral Foundation was covered in your Polity Current Affairs lecture itself. So you don't need to read this article. But what I would want is that you need to read these articles. This particular article in Indian Express, COVID crisis underlines need to invest in healthcare, infrastructure and environment. What they say in this article is that for government has realized its lesson. What COVID-19 has taught us is that government needs to invest more in healthcare, more in infrastructure and environment. And the last article is about NHAI, how NHAI plans to raise funds to invest more on roads, bridges and all, infrastructure. NHAI is National Highway Authority of India. All right. So my advice to you guys would be that read these two articles. All right. And with that, we end our discussion. That's it from my side, guys. I hope you liked the lecture. If you have any doubts, then please write those doubts to us. I'll be happy to clear them out. Right. So that's it from my side, guys. I'll see you next time with more stuff. Thank you.